Just a few years back, I took a mini road trip up to Indiana to visit my sister who had just had her first baby. The drive was going to take about 14 hours, but I was planning on doing it all at once. I work an overnight shift, so I was thinking I would drive overnight, get a few hours sleep at a nearby hotel, and then go stay with them for the remainder of my time. This would also mean little to no traffic because the highways are typically pretty empty at 1 in the morning. I let my sister know when I got on the road around noon and told her I would be at her place the next morning. The start of the drive was pretty normal. I stopped a few times for a restroom break and snacks, and hit a little traffic around 5 p.m. Of course, I would be driving through a major city at that point. But once I got past that, it was back to smooth sailing and a long but easy drive. It was around midnight, and it would be 15 to 20 minutes between seeing another vehicle. I was fully awake, but was needing a chance to stretch my legs, so I decided that I would stop at the next gas station to give myself a break. The sign I saw showed a single gas station on it, but I was fine with it. I didn't need anything extravagant, just needed a safe place to stop and maybe grab a drink. Unfortunately, it appeared as though the gas station was not 24/7, as the sign portrayed, because the lights were off and the door was locked. So I just took the moment to stretch and walk around. As I walked back to my car, I noticed my passenger front tire looked low, so I pulled out my tire gauge and, sure enough, it confirmed my suspicions. Thankfully, their air pump was accessible 24/7, and I pulled my car over to the air pump to start filling it up, and decided to check the rest of them while I was at it. On the second tire, I started hearing the sounds of other tires rolling up in the parking lot. I turned to see an old green van pull up to the pump and get out. Just another traveler stopping for gas, I thought. I continued to work on my tires when I heard a door open and close, and feet walking closer to me. I looked over and saw a man in jeans and a t-shirt walking toward me. "Beautiful night for a drive," he said with his hands out. I was friendly and agreed with him, and he asked where I was coming from. I was honest because he gave me no reason not to be, and explained that I was driving to my sister's in Indiana. He whistled and mentioned how that was a long drive, especially overnight. I laughed and said that I was usually working at this time, so it wasn't really that big of a deal for me. He seemed surprised by that, mentioning how it's a hard shift to work. Then he asked if I needed any help. I thanked him, but declined, seeing as how I was just putting air in my tires. Nothing was wrong otherwise. No flats or anything. But then he got closer and crouched next to me and asked, "You mind if I take a look?" I thought it was odd because I literally just said what I was doing. There was nothing wrong with my tires, but I just moved and motioned him over to look at it himself. To be honest, being a younger woman, I get that a lot. While getting gas, putting air in my tires, even one time I was changing my wiper blades. I'm not totally helpless when it comes to cars, but I digress. As expected, he stood back up and confirmed it looked like they were just low and that he didn't see any leaks or holes in my tires. Still, I was polite and smiled, thanking him for checking. I noticed he was still standing in place, which was now blocking my driver door. I did the Midwestern thing and started motioning toward my door when he spoke up and said, "You know, there's a faster route than staying on the interstate," claiming it would save me about half an hour to get to the next major city. He pointed with an over there motion to a road that went behind this little gas station. He said that it was a county road, but from what I could see, it just looked like a dirt path that could lead up to someone's house. This wasn't the first time I had driven to my sister's, so I was not only familiar with the route that I was taking, but also preferred it. Maybe it was a comfort thing, a familiarity of seeing the same places. But I certainly didn't want to take the unfamiliar dirt road in the middle of nowhere, in the dark. So, once again, I said that was good to know and thanked him, then motioned towards my door. Finally, he moved. I got in and he slowly started walking toward his van. He stood in front of it as I pulled out. I certainly didn't take the dirt road, but got back on the same highway that I was already taking. Kind of an odd interaction, but it was what it was, I thought to myself, and moved on. At least, now I was back on the road. I wasn't on the road for very long when I saw another vehicle coming up behind me. I'm the type that, on an empty highway like that one, I will typically go about 5, maybe 10 over the speed limit, so when this vehicle approached me as fast as it did, I knew it was going way faster than it needed to be. But I kept to the right, expecting them to pass me. They did not. They stayed behind me, and they were close enough that I could no longer see their headlights. It was so strange to me. Why, on such an empty road, would you do that to someone instead of just going around? But then, as we passed under one of the few streetlights, I could make out that it was a green van, with something hanging from the mirror, much like the man that had stopped for gas. There were so many questions going through my head. Was he really following behind me now? And why? What good would it do? Based on the direction he entered the gas station, he was heading the same direction as myself, so that was okay, but if I wasn't going fast enough, why wouldn't he just pass? It was making me pretty uncomfortable, especially with how close he was following. I even tried slowing down to 5 under the speed limit, then 10 under, and he would just match my speed. This continued for several miles, and I was getting more and more anxious. There were 2 cars in that time that passed by too, which for some reason made it worse for me. Like my chances of help just kept on going, slowly fading into the darkness. I thought about taking the next exit, but then I was worried about it being just as remote as the last one I stopped at. If he was following, what would happen if I did stop? But then I saw a sign for a way station. This is where I thought I would take a chance. I don't know much about the station, but my uncle is a long-haul trucker, and he actually told me a few stories about helping people on the road, so my thoughts went to him. Surely there would be someone there, just one person that would help me. So I did something pretty stupid. I sped up as we got closer to the exit, so did the van. Then at the very last second, like tires dipping into the grass at the divider last kind of second, I swerved over to the exit lane for the station. Thankfully, this did exactly what I was hoping for and caught the guy off guard, and he didn't have a choice but to keep going straight. Once I exited, I drove up to the station and stopped. From there, I considered getting back on the highway, thinking if he was truly following me, maybe he would turn around to get back, and I would now have a good start ahead of him. But then I worried about him catching up and being in that same position, so I decided to stay. I slowly rolled up next to a truck in my tiny little hatchback, and there was a guy standing next to the driver's door smoking. I remember the confused look on his face when he saw me. He bent over to look in my window, and before he could say anything, I told him I was being followed. His reaction was just what I needed. He asked me who was following me. I explained that it was some random guy. He asked me to describe what he was driving and what he looked like, and then he told me what he would do to him if he stopped there and bothered me. I immediately felt relieved. I don't know what it is, but the truckers that I have met have always been very kind and fatherly to me. He radioed something in, and then walked me to the small rest building and offered to buy me a drink from the vending machine. I, instead, bought the drinks. We talked for a bit as we looked around, but thankfully there was only one other trucker and a highway patrol officer that showed up. Little did I know that that officer was there for me. The trucker had called it in for me, and I appreciated it even more. I explained to him what happened, and the cop looked at me curiously. I thought maybe he didn't believe me, but then asked me again about the gas station I stopped at. The officer explained that the dirt road the guy was calling out pretty much went nowhere. He said that it led to a very small town about half an hour from the station, and that unless you lived there was no reason to go, because they didn't have anything. I understood the reason the officer may have told us, but at the same time, I kind of wished that he hadn't. That only confirmed my suspicion. The guy was up to no good. I tried not to think about what his plans actually were. The cop offered to follow behind me to the next major city, and I accepted. I thanked the trucker for everything and left the station. Once we got to the next city, I stopped and the cop said he was going his own way from there, and I again thanked him as well. I never saw that guy or any other weird people after that, but I also didn't stop again. If I was tired whatsoever, I certainly wasn't after all that. I got to my sister's and we had a great time, and my trip back was pretty unremarkable, which was fine by me. I hope to never run into that man again, and big shout out to the awesome trucker who said he was more than willing to run that guy over just for my safety. I wanted to share something that happened to me when I was a teenager, trying to make my own money. This was way back before cell phones and computers, where I would get the paper and sit there for hours circling and crossing out the classified section. Just to show you the approximate decade that we're talking about here. I was going to be starting college in the fall, and I was broke. I had a part-time job but wasn't making much money there. I was hoping to save up some before starting college so that I had some free time. I wanted to enjoy my college days and was not liking the idea of only ever having time to go to class and work. I wanted to find a summer job that made a decent amount of money. So, I was scouring that paper trying to find anything I could. Eventually, I did find one that, to be honest, seemed too good to be true. And I should have stopped and listened to myself there. It was listed as a retreat guide for a spiritual retreat center. The pay was given in a lump sum and at the end of the time because it was going to be 2 months long, starting in mid-June and ending in mid-August. At the time, I thought it was a good deal because, while you did have to stay there for the duration, they covered the cost of your room, food, and entertainment. To me, it sounded like a free vacation, and I would get paid for it. So yeah, being naive, I jumped on the opportunity. My dad thought that it sounded nice. My mom was a little curious at first because she had never heard of the retreat before and wasn't familiar with it. But my dad and I both convinced her that it was fine. She was worried about her young daughter going camping with strangers, but I explained that it was a spiritual retreat. So, I was expecting it to be religious. My family wasn't exactly church people, but they believed in something. So, I think that convinced them too that I would be in good hands. I gave them a call to set up an interview, and they asked me to come in that same day. I rushed to get ready and make myself presentable, and then met them in a small building with a sign above it that said something like, the Awakening Center. Inside, the building looked kind of empty, but I was greeted by a middle-aged woman in a white sundress. She introduced herself and apologized for the shape of the building, as she said they were just getting moved into it, which did make sense. The entrance had a small desk that she was at with 2 folding chairs in front of the desk. There was a plant in the corner and a sign directing people to the auditorium in the back. The interview was quick and seemed more centered around my soft skills. She wanted to know if I was capable of doing manual labor, such as cleaning, picking things up, and maybe even assisting with some construction. I was honest and explained that I had never done any kind of construction work. I was a 19-year-old girl, but I did say that I was willing to learn. She also went over how having an open mind was a must with people, and again, I just took it at face value, since it was called The Awakening. I figured it was religious, and maybe not even one that I was interested in. Hey, I was just there to work for them. I didn't care what they believed in. And she seemed satisfied with my answers, and to my surprise, she hired me on the spot. She gave me an ID of sorts to use while I was there and directions to the grounds they would be using, and said that she would give me more of a rundown when I arrived. I went home ecstatic that I got the job so easily, and began preparing my bags for what I wanted to take. Approaching the grounds, there was a large gravel area in the front, where there were several cars parked, including a van with the same logo on it. Behind it was a cabin-like building with a tall wooden privacy fence surrounding it so you couldn't see in the back. To my surprise, the woman that had interviewed me, who I'll call Beth, was sitting on the porch with a handful of pamphlets and a clipboard. I watched her write something down when a man walked up and motioned him inside. When I walked up to her, she gave me a quick rundown of the plans for the day and led me inside after having someone else cover for her spot. That's when I noticed everyone in there was wearing white. The women in white dresses, the men in white pants and a shirt. I assumed it was part of the uniform or required attire. It wasn't my business either way. Anyway, Beth first showed me to my room in that same building that was down a long hallway. There was a bunk bed, and she said that the other helpers would be bunking with me. I was a little disappointed, thinking I would have my own place, but I couldn't complain. It was all paid for. Once I sat my bags down, she asked me for my size so that she could get me my clothes. I mentioned that I had brought my own, but she said they had uniforms you had to wear. Again, I just thought, of course, probably to tell the staff apart, and then when I wasn't working, I could wear my own clothes while I explored. She then led me around the rest of the building that included a large dining area, the kitchen. She showed me where the supply closets were and went through the rules along the way. After all the touring, we were then at the back of the building, and she said that she would show me the, quote, living grounds, as she put it. She looked pretty excited to show me, so I assumed the back must have been where all the fun stuff was. The back walls were lined with smaller cabins. From the outside, they were probably big enough to fit a small bedroom and bathroom, and that's it. So I guess you were expected to have dinner in the cafeteria. I did see a trail that went into the trees in the back, and dead center was a large gazebo-like area that Beth explained was their meditation hall. She said they gathered there 3 times a day, and that was their quiet hours. No one was to talk, eat, use the bathroom, etc. during that time, as it was their chance to reconnect with their true nature and the cosmic energy that binds us all, or something to that effect. I assumed that would be my own time to do whatever I wanted in my room, so I didn't disturb them. After the tour, Beth took me back to my room where someone had placed some kind of uniform on the desk, and Beth told me I could get changed and meet her in the kitchen. That was the first moment I'd had to myself, to really gather my thoughts and take it all in. I didn't know a single person there, but everyone seemed nice. Everyone I saw was probably middle-aged or so. I saw a few people there with kids, at least 2 younger people, and some that were old enough to be my grandparents. But everyone smiled and waved as we walked around, and they held the doors open for us, so I felt comfortable. I didn't feel like I was about to be treated like some lowly worker, and I thought maybe this came with the territory, with their religion and mission. I changed into their uniform, which oddly enough was a plain white dress, much like Beth's. I did think it was strange, especially if they expected me to do more strenuous labor, but I didn't think too much on it. I was honestly still pretty excited about the whole situation. Dinner was a bit different than I was used to. They called out that they did not consume any meat or animal products, and all the produce they had was grown in their own gardens. This made sense, because it was just a vegetable soup with bread and a salad. It did taste pretty good, though. Afterwards, they went to the gazebo for meditation, and I started walking toward my room and noticed a lot of people watching me at that point, with raised eyebrows. I thought it was weird, and I didn't know why I was being watched, but I just continued on my way. From then on, I learned pretty quickly that I was not there to simply work for them. This was their way to get more followers in the door. No one came to get me the rest of that night, but the following morning, Beth was at my door looking disappointed. She asked me why I wasn't at the meditation, and I mentioned it wasn't my thing, and I figured that I shouldn't bother them. She told me that everyone was required to attend, staff included. I told her that I wasn't interested, but she very sternly told me that it wasn't an option, and if I didn't attend, I would have to leave. Being prideful and already wasting the time going out there, I finally agreed to attend. I figured I could just grin and bear it and move on. But I didn't realize, until that morning after breakfast, that it lasted for 2 hours. 2 hours, we all crammed ourselves into this gazebo in the hot summer sun, sitting silently cross-legged with our eyes closed. I would peek around and see a few people, like Beth, walking around the perimeter and making hand motions to the others doing the same. That was the first time I was kind of scared. Why were they watching us so hard? Why would it matter if someone didn't do this? At the end of each session, a man would come out and talk to all of us. I assumed this was the leader or pastor or whatever they called him. He mentioned at the first one I attended that he had a spiritual awakening after a near-death experience. And since then, he felt it was a sign to help others awaken to their cosmic consciousness. This was sounding a bit more out there than what I was expecting. But once again, being 19, I thought I could get through it, make my money, and then just never see these people again. But again, things would escalate, and I started to feel unsafe. Between the painfully long meditations, I would then quickly have to help clean and prepare for dinner. They only served breakfast and dinner. And if I didn't do something completely accurate, like using too much soap, I would be reprimanded. If I woke up late or took too long to get ready, I would be reprimanded. And their choice of punishment was typically either an extra meditation session or a skipped meal. They didn't have snacks or extra things like that to eat, so there were a few days that I went with only one meal. I also finally got a roommate, but to both of our surprise, it was a guy that was 4 years older than me. He had also applied for a job and ended up here, but had to start late. At first, I was scared and confused that they would bunk me with a man, given their whole situation here. All the cabins were separated, unless there were couples there, so why would they bunk us together? Did they not have separate living quarters? Thankfully, after talking to the guy, he also thought it was really weird and we seemed to be the only two people questioning any of this. So, after explaining to him some of the things I had witnessed, we kind of began to watch out for one another. It was a few more grueling weeks of this, the meditation speech becoming more of an indoctrination of sorts. The lack of a good meal, because let's face it, you can only cook potatoes and carrots in so many ways, was starting to get to me. But then, one night, I saw something that told me I needed to get out of there before something happened to me. And Sunday night, we had a gathering that once again everyone had to attend. But this time, the leader talked about how to gain their awakened consciousness, and referred to his experience. A man in the audience was brought to the podium with him and lied on a table beside the leader. The man explained that to understand, you must first die. Yes, he said you had to die. And everyone nodded, and they were all acting like this was the most sane thing that someone had ever said. When the leader was done speaking, he was handed a white cloth, twisted like a rope. He dipped it into a bowl of water, and then I watched as he wrapped it around this man's neck. I don't need to say more about what I witnessed, but after it was all said and done, he hit him on the chest several times, and one of the woman helpers standing nearby joined him in hitting, shaking, and smacking the man until he finally gasped. I was terrified. I just watched these people nearly kill a man, and for what? I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to witness this, and I was already fearing for my safety. Once back in my room, I started crying, and my roommate helped to comfort me and told me that I should leave. I told him that he should come with me because I was worried for him too, but he refused. He said that he would help me to make sure that I got out okay, but that he would stay because he wanted to take all this to the police. Clearly, he had been duped just like I had. They didn't need help, they needed victims. That night, I packed my bag and he followed me out the front door when Beth stopped us. She said that I wasn't allowed to leave in the middle of the retreat. Before I could say anything, the man argued with her that I was too young to be here. She tried to threaten me about the money, saying that I wouldn't get any of it, and I told her that I didn't want it. She then said that I wasn't allowed to copy any part of the retreat for my own benefit, and I laughed at that statement. Why the hell would I want any part of that? The man stood between Beth and I, telling me to go, and I didn't hesitate any longer. I left that building, tossed my bag in my back seat, and burned out of there without looking back. I drove home and cried in my confused parents' arms. I explained everything to them, what they did, the meditations, the uniforms, the strangling, and even the man that had helped me escape. And I felt guilty at that point. My mom immediately took me to the police station to report it. While there, they seemed skeptical at first, but as my mom pushed me to give them every little detail that I could think of, the cop seemed to begin taking me seriously. They said that they would look into it, took down our contact information, and then we left. I didn't hear much about what happened to the place after that. I know from my parents and from around the area that the cops did show up and ask about it, and the owners. I presume the leader told them that everyone was there willingly for a retreat, and when the cop asked if anyone wanted to leave, there were only 2 people that did. I don't know who it was, but I do hope that that man was one of them. But because no one was saying that they were being held there, they couldn't, or wouldn't, do anything further. I never heard from or about that man again, but I'm incredibly thankful that he gave me the courage to finally leave and to help me. I had already been there for about a month, and about a week in, he was already seeing everything wrong with the situation and was willing to risk his own safety to get me out of there. And for that, I hope he's doing okay. Clearly, it's been multiple decades since this took place, but it's definitely opened my eyes to some of the monsters that we may not recognize. I didn't take on any other odd jobs like that, and eventually, I settled on being a cleaner and stay-at-home mom, and it does fit me a lot better. I know finding jobs is a lot different nowadays, but to anyone out there desperate to find a job, especially younger people, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And if you ever feel unsafe in a job or situation, get out of there fast, because a legitimate business would never threaten your safety. My brother and I were out driving in my car with him behind the wheel. We pulled up to a red light and waited. At that moment, I felt a familiar sensation. Another random nosebleed. I always kept paper towels in the car for this exact reason, so I reached back to grab them. But for some reason, they weren't where I usually kept them. As I turned to check the back seat, I noticed something. A car in the distance speeding toward us way too fast. My gut told me that something was wrong, and I quickly told my brother, and he started watching it too. As it got closer, it became clear. and that driver wasn't stopping. Without hesitation, my brother laid on the horn and ran the red light, turning right just in time. The other cars at the intersection, alerted by the horn, hesitated, just long enough to see what we saw. The speeding car blew straight through the intersection without even tapping the brakes. No one was hurt. No one honked at us in frustration. If anything, it seemed like the warning had saved others, too. But here's what gets me. I always kept those paper towels behind the seats, yet somehow, that day, they were in the trunk. If they had been where they were supposed to be, I wouldn't have turned all the way around. I wouldn't have seen that car coming. Was it just a coincidence, divine intervention, or quantum immortality? I'll never know for sure, but I do know that we were meant to make it out of that moment alive. Raven, I appreciate the way in which you handle difficult stories with care and compassion. That's why I feel you are the best choice for telling this one. I'll try to get a couple of my stories typed up and sent soon. I've had quite a few unexplainable experiences throughout my lifetime, such as glitches, paranormal, and precognitive dreams. My scariest encounters and experiences have been with humans. My childhood was full of emotional, verbal, and physical abuse. My teens and 20s filled with trauma that affected me greatly, but the story that has periodically popped into my mind throughout the past 30 years isn't mine. I often think about the two main characters. We'll keep anonymity for their privacy and call them April, Josh, and Sharon. In the late 80s, April, 7, Josh, 5, and their mom, Sharon, 32, had just moved from another state into my town. Sharon had just divorced their dad. She enrolled them at my school, a small private school for a strict bunch of Christian Protestants. It was common for different age groups and grades to interact and know each other. April was a grade behind me, 1 year younger, but we got to know each other well between school and church. I liked April a lot. She was always kind to me. I knew who Josh was, being her little brother, but I did not know him well. Sharon, their mom, started working, going to college to become a nurse, and began to occasionally date. My older sister would sometimes babysit April and Josh when needed, but this sister was 5 years older and didn't really talk about anything with me. This was the 80s and 90s, so the majority of us were latchkey kids. From a young age, most kids I knew were outside playing and getting into all kinds of things without adult supervision, from the time school ended until the streetlights came on. However, April and Josh weren't really able to interact with the other kids outside of school and church. They lived in the same neighborhood as me. I would move all throughout the neighborhood playing with different groups of kids and switching up between the two parks available, about a mile apart. I never saw them out, and no one else ever seemed to see them out playing. Sharon had to take out loans to attend college, and in the early 90s she had earned her nursing degree, and was able to get hired immediately. However, the $23,000 a year just wasn't enough to keep up with the cost of living and pay back the loans. She was struggling financially. The credit cards being used to supplement for bills and purchases were piling up. In the mid-90s, Sharon went to purchase a gun. At that time, there was a 3-day cooling-off period between when she applied for it and was able to pick the gun up from the store. On that third day, a Thursday, Sharon picked up her gun and returned home with it. That evening, as April, now 13, and Josh, now 11, slept, Sharon wrote a note, disconnected the phones, and barricaded her front door. She then proceeded to enter the room where April and Josh slept. Sharon shot both of her children as they lay sleeping and turned the gun on herself. Sharon was dead immediately from her self-inflicted gunshots. However, April and Josh were not. Again, this took place Thursday night. April and Josh both suffered damage to their spinal cords and did not know who had shot them. They spent the first night and day lying on their beds, hoping that help would come. Friday evening, Josh, who had suffered a gunshot wound to his neck, crawled to the edge of his bed to reach the phone. When he realized it was dead and he could not call for help, he used the handset to bang on the wall, hoping to draw some attention for assistance. While banging the phone, Josh fell off the bed and onto his dead mother's body. As a result of the gunshot wound to her neck, April could only move her back. She made herself fall down to the floor and slowly moved her body while on her back toward the living room to attempt to find the other phones. She could do nothing with the barricaded front door in her state and was unable to locate the other phone. She later found out because her mom had hid it. April proceeded to turn the TV on at full blast in hopes of drawing attention to help her and Josh. I cannot even begin to imagine what the next several days were like for them. They lay in those positions without food or water, with gunshot wounds from Friday until Tuesday. They were conscious most of the time, praying and encouraging each other. On Tuesday, coworkers of Sharon were concerned about her no-call, no-show since Friday. One coworker went to the house, found that there was no answer, and heard the TV blasting. She proceeded to contact the police. The police found both children, Josh still lying with his mother's dead body, and April still on the floor in the living room. They had been shot Thursday evening, had moved into these positions on Friday, where they remained until Tuesday. In the note left by Sharon, she was depressed. She was overwhelmed with financial burdens. She was plagued by migraines and nightmares, and she had not had any long-term luck with dating, and did not see any way out of it all. She already felt that she was neglecting her children with the time spent working, and would neglect them further if she worked more to attempt to dig them out of debt. In her religious fervor, she believed they would suffer without her, and be better off if she sent them to heaven with Jesus. April and Josh's injuries were critical and had caused some paralyzing damage. Their grandmother and 2 aunts came to be with them and take them back to their home state once they were stable. I experienced some dark times, but I cannot even begin to imagine what their experience caused them to live with. Finding out their own mother attempted to take their lives. Josh having to spend 4 days lying with his mother's body. Both of them spending 5 days without medical help, food, or water with gunshot wounds to their necks, and not knowing if help would arrive on time. This tragedy has stayed with me throughout the years. I'm a mother. I've struggled financially and mentally. In my darkest moments, when I had thoughts of taking myself out of the equation, I could never fathom trying to harm my children or end their existence. Even if I believed they would suffer in this world, I could never. There is always hope, even if you're struggling to see it. It's there waiting for you to turn away from the fear and pain and see it, and feel it, even for just a moment. Please, if you are struggling in any way, ask for help. Those who love you cannot know what you need unless you ask. If you shift your perspective ever so slightly, you'll catch a glimmer of hope. I never spoke to April again after this occurred, but I have thought about her often over the years. I hope her and her brother have found ways to heal from the mental and emotional trauma this caused. I've occasionally searched for them since social media became a thing, but when I begin looking, I always wonder how I would even initiate conversation. Would it do them more harm than good to remind them and bring it all back to the surface? Even if I never mention a thing about this experience, I am a reminder from this time in their lives. I've tried to leave out enough details that no stranger could locate the story and identify them, and I only ask that if your curiosity allows you to locate it, please let them be. Don't spread their identities. Thank you, Raven, for all that you do. We greatly appreciate you and your sincerity. It was the summer of 1998. I was with my then girlfriend on a short trip not far from where we both lived at the time. Let's say somewhere in Belgium. And that's as specific as I'm willing to get. She was about to move away for college, and I was struggling with it, so we took this little nature escape to talk, to process the change, maybe to decide what we were going to do with our relationship. The place we went to was somewhere I knew from childhood. A local river valley, quiet, rural, a slow meandering stream cutting through farmland and clusters of willows. A typical countryside over here. We stood by the water's edge. It was dark by then, and we were holding each other. She looked out over my shoulder, and I looked over hers. And that's when it happened. At first I thought I was seeing the sunset in reverse, like a film being rewound. Something bright orange and glowing rose slowly behind the trees in the distance. The sun had set maybe half an hour earlier, so this made no sense. But it was happening. Literally, not figuratively. A ball of light just climbing up from behind the trees, just like the sun. Except the sky didn't react the way it should. No horizon glow, no ambient light, just darkness. And this thing. I felt something shift in my chest, a tightening. I was about to call out to her when the glowing orb dipped behind the trees again. Gone. Like it had never been there. I turned to her, eyes wide, trying to explain what I had just seen. My voice was shaky, out of breath. "You're not going to believe this," I said. "I saw something. Something really weird." And right then, it came back. The exact same orb rose again from behind the trees. But this time my girlfriend saw it too. It climbed into the sky slowly, eerily smooth, and with it came a ring. A ring of spinning lights. Vivid, saturated colors rotating like a kaleidoscope. Green, blue, red, violet. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The lights pulsed hypnotically. Some of them almost seemed to burn into our vision. Not painfully, but compelling. Like your eyes refused to look away. She gasped, "Oh my God." We both stood frozen. No sound. Just this silent glowing sphere, maybe 15 to 20 meters in diameter, getting bigger. That's when we realized that it wasn't just hovering, it was coming closer. Smooth, deliberate, not aggressive, but unstoppable. It was maybe 300 meters away when I panicked. "Run!" We bolted down to the field where I had parked, jumped in the car. I drove like a man possessed. The rest of that evening was a blur. We barely spoke, she couldn't sleep, and I barely blinked. The next morning, I suggested that we go back. Maybe we would find something. Tracks, a burn mark, crop circles, I don't know. It was before the days of Google Maps, so we tried to pinpoint the location on an old-fashioned map. We biked there, we searched, and we found nothing. That afternoon, I went back again, alone. She didn't want to talk about it anymore. She'd seen it, yes, but she wanted to move on. I couldn't. I had to go. I walked my bike into the woods, through narrowing paths, until even riding wasn't possible. Eventually, I was deep in the part of the forest I barely recognized. And then I heard them. Voices. Clear, but I couldn't tell what language was being spoken. The words were muffled. I crept forward, my heart hammering, and that's when I saw them. 3, maybe 4 men, standing at the edge of the woods at what I believed had been the site of the orb. 2 of them wore uniforms and the others were in civilian clothes. At first they didn't notice me, but as I stepped closer, one turned. I walked toward him. "Are you here because of what happened last night?" I asked. He stared at me, not confused, not angry, just blank. like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. Then he turned to his colleague, who was facing away from us, and said nothing. That's when it hit me. This guy looked uber American. Not just foreign, but American. Unfashionable khakis, faded jean shirt, chunky white sneakers. The kind of look you would see on a dad at Disney World. His haircut, his posture, his silence. It's something we easily spot as Europeans. Another man approached, also in plain clothes, but he looked local. Behind him, a uniformed officer followed. They came right up to me. "You can't be here," the local policeman said. "There's an ongoing federal investigation." "Is it about the lights?" I asked. "From last night?" "I'm not authorized to comment. Please just leave the area now." The American-looking man said something I couldn't understand. Not because I don't speak English, but because he was speaking around me. Like I wasn't even there. It was clear who was in charge. The others deferred to him. He didn't wear a badge or have any ID, but his presence screamed authority. I left, slowly. But I looked back, and they were still watching me. Later that day, I told my family and friends. A few weeks later, I returned to the area, but by then it was too late. The place looked normal, empty, like nothing had ever happened. Years later, I asked the local police if they ever had federal or local agents going to that specific area for an investigation. They looked at me like I was crazy. And those men, I never saw them again. Not during traffic stops, not in town, not anywhere. Hello again, Raven. And as always, loving the content on the channel. Thank you for using the stories I've sent in from my crazy life, and I did mention before that I've got plenty of crazy experiences and stories from my childhood, teen years, and all through my adulthood that I can share with you in the future, as well as stories from my wife, which she's okay with me sharing now too. This story once again takes place during one of your Saturday live streams, which I will say again to everyone listening, are awesome, and a great way to spend your Saturday evening with some really cool people. I agree, you all should come to one. Set the reminder, folks. Saturdays are awesome, and I wouldn't be plugging so hard if they weren't. I'm an unpaid solicitor for the Saturday community nights, and I'm proud of it. Anyway, this story takes place a couple of weeks back during the live stream where Raven played the horror game that started off like a kid's game. I think it was called Julian and Friends. Correct me if I'm wrong. No, you were correct, and that game was terrifying. I was once again at work on a night shift at Emperor's Pizza making dough, and if you've heard one of the recent stories Raven shared, a lot has been going on at my job due to a dispute between our pizza place and the donut shop down the strip from us. It was actually around 6:30 p.m., and I was working a night shift because my wife and I had a meeting about the movie being made about our lives, and I switched from a morning shift to not lose hours. Emperor's Pizza was busy, and for the most part, everything seemed to be normal. Chaotic, as most fast food places are, but normal for us. A rather heavy-set man came in sporting a large black t-shirt with the members of KISS on it, some off-colored green shorts, and a baseball cap with a local sports team emblem on it, and I was talking with my coworker about placing an order. My coworker, who we'll call Andy, is a proud and flamboyant type. And none of us have a problem with it, but sometimes we have customers that try to pick fights with him because he comes off more feminine than they like. And I personally don't like bullies, and am not going to stand for anyone picking on anyone, period. So, whenever I hear a coworker getting harassed or attacked by a customer, I always go up front and try to mediate and regulate, even though I'm technically just the dough guy. Andy is actually the shift lead, which is like a type of manager that's assigned to specific shifts. And then we have our actual store manager, who we already agreed to call Carly from a previous story. The heavy-set guy in this story gets no protection. His name is Justin, and you'll see why he doesn't get the privilege of a pseudonym in this story in just a few minutes. Justin came in and was speaking with Andy, and we actually had run out of regular dough, which I was currently making extra batches of. So Andy told Justin that all we currently had were a few of our deep dish options, wings, and some other combos. Justin yelled out, "What the F?" and basically started throwing a fit about how we didn't have anything, and Andy told him that we do have options, just not the ones he might have wanted. But we would have more dough ready in about 30 minutes. Justin apparently didn't like this, since he began to berate the company and start bad-mouthing our service. But then he switched his focus as Andy was apologizing for the lack of dough. Justin started making comments about why Andy was, quote, talking like that, and how he needed to, quote, stop trying to act like a girl. And really, he just started in on Andy in the worst way. Andy, of course, became enraged and started to reprimand Justin, basically refocusing the issue on how Justin was upset about the pizza, and not about how Andy was talking. But Justin insisted, and eventually started making threats. "How about I come around that corner and slap you straight?" Justin threatened, and that's when my ears really went up. There are two things I don't tolerate at my job, and the second one is anyone threatening to come behind the counter and do anything to my coworkers. I racked the last few stacks of dough and headed up front as Andy and Justin were now arguing back and forth loudly over the counter. And I basically did the stereotypical, "Whoa, what's going on here?" to break up the argument. Justin looked me up and down, and I told my friend Andy that I would handle this from here, and that he could head back into the kitchen to calm himself and call our manager. Justin told me a story about how Andy sister-girled him with attitude, and told him that he couldn't order at our store, and so on. I mentioned to him that I heard part of the conversation, and I introduced myself as the dough guy and told him the reason we don't have dough is because we had an earlier rush of large orders, and I was currently making double the dough we needed to stay afloat. I apologized and tried to offer him something else for free, something the manager Carly lets me do because I've broken up plenty of customer fights with coworkers, and even though it wasn't my job, I was apparently good at it. But no, Justin didn't want that. "I don't want anything for free. I want that little punk kid to come effing apologize to me and beg me not to kick his ass," Justin demanded to me. I kindly told him that I couldn't make anyone do anything here, and also told him that cursing and yelling wasn't going to fix the problem, and that if he wanted to leave, he could leave. Justin told me that I needed to put a muzzle on Andy, to which Andy shouted from the kitchen that he could kiss his ass. And they started arguing all over again. Justin began moving to the side of the counter that opened up to our kitchen space, and I paralleled him to keep him from entering the space. Because again, I wasn't about to let anyone come behind the counter, or they would see the other side of me that my wife always tells me to avoid using. He started demanding for Andy to get on his knees and beg for forgiveness. And Andy, being the witty comeback guy he is, told him that what he was suggesting was oddly sus for someone who just spewed a plethora of homophobic slurs at him. I told Andy that I would handle it and told Justin that he was dealing with me, and that he had nothing else to say to Andy. Then I told Andy to call the manager and to prepare to call 911 if Justin came behind the counter. "What the hell are you going to do if I do come back there?" Justin threatened me, and at that point I took off my hat and accepted that this might be the day I lose my job. "Don't let the uniform fool you, sir, but I'd really not have to go there. If you come behind this counter, I will forcibly detain you because this is getting out of hand," I told him. I noticed his eyes kept going to my chest and back to my eyes, and then I saw him take a step back and smile in a sneering, sarcastic way, as he nodded a few times and then looked past me at Andy, who was holding his phone and the store phone, one of which had our manager Carly on speaker. "Tell you what, I better not see either one of you outside this store, or it'll be a whole different conversation," Justin told me back. He left after that, and for a second, I stood in the space to see if he was going to come back in, and he didn't. He got into his white Ford F-150 outside and left. I remember looking at the front of the truck and seeing that he had a custom U.S. Army license plate on it, and then I realized that when he looked down at my chest, he was eyeballing my dog tag, which oftentimes gets mistaken for a military dog tag quite a bit. For clarity to anyone out there who hears this story and might be a veteran, I was never in the armed forces, but I was part of a civilian program that ran through a martial arts and physical training facility, and we used to host private classes for police officers and people who were about to enlist in various branches. After my old master gave me the nickname Hidden Fox, I was given a dog tag as a welcome gift. I wear that dog tag all the time, and when I'm at work, I put my wedding band on it to keep it from getting lost or stuck in the dough that I make by hand. I'm not able to share details about what all we trained in or taught, but I'll say I specialized in scenarios centered around what if you can't get to a firearm, and spatial awareness. I digress. After Justin left, we went back to work, and I did pop in and out of the stream that Raven was hosting that night, trying to have a better night because, again, I do have a big issue with bullies, and I can't stand seeing people get hurt or picked on for being different. Everything seemed to get better for a couple of hours or so. And then, Justin's truck came back about 30 minutes before closing time. This time he didn't get out, but he sat in his truck in front of our store just watching us. I can see the front parking lot from the dough room and most of the kitchen, and front counter can be seen from the large picture windows in front of our store. Andy was cleaning up, and I told him that the guy was back because I could see him staring daggers into the front windows. And eventually he looked over at me, and then back into the front kitchen area. I told Andy to call 911, and I shot a text over to our manager to let her know the situation wasn't apparently over just yet. I kept thinking of what we could do because, at some point, Andy would have to leave, and our other coworker was already finishing up dishes and starting on sweeping and mopping. I'd still be there since I had a little more dough to make for Sunday. Andy called 911 and told the dispatch that he needed a police unit sent to our store because a man who came in earlier and verbally attacked him was now back at the store, sitting in the front parking lot in his truck. I went to go check the security monitors at the manager's station, which was a small desk just outside the dough room, and zoomed in on the front parking lot camera so that I could see just what Justin was doing. And that's when I saw him place what was clearly a handgun on the front dashboard of his truck. I told Andy to relay that to the dispatch and to lock the rear door, since the lobby was already closed for the evening. But we often kept the back door unlocked so we could shuttle our trash to the dumpster out back. Something I warned them several times over was a huge security issue. And after this event, my coworkers listened to me. Justin stayed in his truck, staring into the store like he was contemplating doing something stupid. And I remember my mind reeling over the ways this could go south if we weren't careful. Besides the single back door, there wasn't another way out of the kitchen. The front was all glass windows, and if Justin decided to shoot the glass, there wasn't anything else to keep him from getting in or getting to us. Our best bet would be to make a run for the back door, but there was a straight line of sight from the front counter area where I stood in front of Justin before to the back door, and a shooter could fire unrestricted into the kitchen area. There weren't enough options for us if Justin intended to come in. Fortunately, within a few minutes of the 911 call, 2 police cars were on site up front with their lights on, and another police SUV was rolling up the drive-thru the wrong way. They, of course, ordered Justin out of his truck and went through the whole process of detaining him, searching his vehicle, and taking his weapon from the dashboard. An officer knocked on our door and asked us to make a statement. Got our info, and meanwhile outside another officer was talking to Justin from the back seat of a police car. I remembered him yelling about how his rights were violated, and that he hadn't done anything, and while this was technically true, since he was just sitting in his truck at the time, the situation earlier, including the threats he made, were enough for the police to take this seriously. The camera footage had no audio, but Andy showed him the video of everything Justin did from the moment he came in to the point he returned to his truck and put his gun on the dashboard. The officer told us that, even with all the evidence, he hadn't done enough for them to hold him, except maybe charge him with something like disturbing the peace. But they were searching his truck and had confiscated his handgun. A second officer came in, and this one we recognized from a few weeks prior. He was the same officer that was on site after the situation with John being beat with the baseball bat. "Geez, you guys are always having some colorful evenings, aren't you?" The officer joked with us. He asked what happened, and Andy and I recapped it once more. I remember they did end up taking Justin away in the cruiser, but I'm not actually sure why. And we did have an officer stay in his cruiser out front until we closed. He said he would do it in exchange for a free pizza. And even though he was joking, we did give him one before we cut the oven off to clean it. The officer hung around for a bit as I wrapped up on dough, and then he left. And I remember getting in the car and seeing Justin's truck still parked out front, wondering why some people are so adamant that everything has to go their way, and that they feel like they can bully people. I was happy to be returning home to my wife, and that nothing happened. But this job has seriously been a pain ever since I started working here last year. It was originally just a part-time job I was doing to help make extra money to pay for our first home as a married couple. And eventually, it turned me into needing this job when a few contracts I had were terminated, due to a lack of funding. But as much as I love making pizza dough, this job is a pain, a headache, and I am seriously looking for something else to do part-time, because I don't get paid enough for all of this. Today we have a write-up on the Hillsong's Fall from Grace, written by a good friend of mine, Tom K. As such, some of the opinionated words, or subjective statements made in the beginning, are his and not necessarily mine. Just want to make that clear. This one will certainly be a convoluted one, as I do have some of my own reasons for being interested in this particular story, or scandal, as it were. It may come as a surprise to some of you that I'm not a terribly religious person. However, my family is a different story altogether. So, back in the late 2000s, my parents and sister actually were involved with a church called North Point Church. Now, I'm going to start this off with a little section about NPC and some of the things I ultimately ended up learning about them, and how all of this connects back to Hillsong. Sometime around 2006, my parents had discovered a brand new church in town that was really making a name for itself, kind of overnight. Everyone was really hyped up by the incredibly positive services that were full of very upbeat music. My sister even told me that it was more like going to a rock concert than a church. My parents had tried multiple times to get me to accompany them, but I never really have been much for going to church. However, in 2009, I found myself at a low point, and I ended up taking my parents up on their invitation to come to a service. The first thing I noticed was that this certainly was not a typical church building. If anything, it looked like a large version of a pole barn that had been enclosed and then had some interior work put in. Nothing that a solid crew couldn't come in and have taken down in time for the cattle auction, should the need ever arise. But the auditorium was definitely its own kind of spectacle. With a very large stage and lighting displays that would have made any rock band envious, lots of laser lights and intricate displays. I couldn't dispute the fact that the services were indeed very uplifting and positive. The pastor was incredibly charismatic, and had a way of making you feel a part of something so much bigger than yourself. It was a very nice thing at first. I even started throwing into the collection plate from time to time, as I was able to do so. I wasn't going every week or anything, and after a couple of months, I started getting more invested in other things. and I kind of fell off going. Not too long after my last time of attending, my parents stopped inviting me. They stopped attending regularly, and they seemed much less excited about going. My sister was friends with one of the administrator's daughters, and at some point she kind of pulled me aside and started filling me in on some things. First, she started telling me why they had gradually started becoming less involved with NPC was because the services started becoming less positive. Over time, they had become a lot darker, and were hyper-focusing on certain things such as deception and infidelity. The more this became a trend, the more my family had kind of walked away when they did. My sister, however, maintained her friendship with the admin's daughter, and she got some really juicy bits of information that later on came out and scandalized the entire church and compromised its entire future. You see, there was a certain amount of tongue-in-cheek in some of those very on-the-nose sermons. It started becoming a known thing amongst the administrators that the pastor was, in fact, conducting multiple affairs with married women. By the time things were becoming public enough that it was a full-blown scandal, it was even deeper than just some extramarital affairs. The pastor was building a harem, a stated goal. While this was happening, other members of the administration were lining their pockets with money from the church's coffers, while pretending to look the other way at the pastor's dalliances. Now, I feel like I should take a minute here to explain that prior to all of this scandalous stuff coming out, it was common knowledge that NPC was, in fact, trying to get into Hillsong's worldwide network. Everything about the church from its earliest days was directly modeled on Hillsong, and they had opened a second church and were trying to turn it into an entire campus, much as Hillsong had in their major locations, such as New York. So, having all this in my head and hearing about the sheer scandal of the corruption at the highest ranks of this, what at the time was a rapidly expanding church, it really gave me pause. If this kind of thing was going on to the extent that it was, how could they possibly hope to become part of this massive worldwide church? And sadly, the answer to that is, what was going on at NPC was pretty par the course, and in many ways far more tame than what would later be found out about the going-ons within Hillsong. Now, I'm not going to sit here and inundate you with the entire history of Hillsong, but I will give a brief explanation because I'm sure at least some of the people hearing this know little, if anything, about Hillsong. So, I'll offer an outline here. In 1984, Brian Houston and his wife Bobby founded Hills Christian Life Centre in Balcombe Hills, New South Wales, Australia. Over the course of the 80s and 90s, the Hills CLC rapidly began to grow into a megachurch. What primarily fueled this astonishing growth was a huge influx of young people who were attracted to the church's contemporary brand of worship music. They also began very early on to seed other churches internationally, which also helped bolster the size and the reach of Hills CLC. The primary draw has always been the music of Hills CLC. In fact, the name Hillsong was originally the name of the band that performed at the services, but the music became such a driving force behind the growth of the church, and became so synonymous with the church, that it officially rebranded as Hillsong. The church even has its own brand, Hillsong Music Australia, which produces all of the music associated with the church and its subsidiaries. They have produced no fewer than 40 albums since 1992. Hillsong Live, later renamed Hillsong Worship, produced albums that all achieved gold status. The entire operation helps sustain the church in its constant global expansion. It's such a driving force in their revenue stream that Hillforce Music has sold more than 60 million albums and earns in the ballpark of $100 million a year. One of the ways that Hillsong has entrenched itself with modern worship is by licensing its music to other churches all over the world. If you've attended a Christian religious service any time since 2014, and the music was memorable and not exactly in the traditional hymnal style, then you've probably experienced Hillsong music, and never stepped foot in a Hillsong church. The Hillsong campus in New York is one of the largest in the world, and whoever provides over the world-famous service is kind of a celebrity in their own right by default. Carl Lentz really took the Hillsong brand to a whole different level during his tenure at Hillsong NYC. He was young, very charismatic, and had a way of connecting with the audience in a way that felt like every word he said was being spoken directly to you, and only you. The sermons themselves were very powerful and moving, and everything about Carl just drew you in and made you want to trust him. In many ways, that would probably be considered the first red flag. He very much was that X factor. Always quick with a joke, and was just overall very magnetic and approachable kind of guy. Though it was also very clear that he cared a lot about his appearance and presentation. Carl always dressed well. His style was trendy, and you could tell that he spent no small amount of time staying in shape. Carl Lentz wasn't the only incredibly charismatic member of the church, though. Of course, the main point of contact in any church, especially one as large as Hillsong NYC, will be the other parishioners. And Hillsong NYC hosts one of the most diverse congregations anywhere in the world. Just showing up for a service, the people make you feel like you have always belonged there. Then, of course, are the welcome teams. Once you arrive, these people will do everything they can to make you feel, well, welcome. The sheer amount of positivity could possibly be overwhelming for some people. Carl Lentz is also highly memorable for his close relationship with Justin Bieber. During a time where being closely associated with the Biebs was kind of toxic for your image, Carl Lentz did not shy away from the troubled young man. In fact, he became something of a mentor to Justin. This could be seen as incredibly symbiotic as far as relationships go. For Justin, at a time when it really needed to seem like he was trying to improve himself, the public relationship with Carl Lentz was exactly what he needed. And for Carl to be around someone as in the mainstream public eye as Justin Bieber was, only pushed Hillsong more into that same mainstream flow. Now, millions of Justin Bieber fans were getting exposed to Carl Lentz, and that made them want to be a part of the same church as their icon. Some people even say that, at a certain point, Carl Lentz became more synonymous with Hillsong than Brian Houston. That's just how powerful his charisma was. Not to mention Carl was now the pastor to the celebrities. Justin Bieber was just the first of a number of famous people who began to attend Hillsong regularly. Eventually, there was even a VIP section for the celebrity parishioners to kind of have their own little space, effectively turning the church into a tiered society. At the time, Hillsong NYC was pulling in more money than any other Hillsong location on the planet, but the rifts that began to form between Brian and Carl would ultimately expose more corruption than anyone ever thought possible. Things had started racing towards a moment of critical mass that was going to leave the world in shock. All the warning signs were there. Carl was becoming more arrogant and full of himself. In his own way, Carl had become a cult leader to a lot of young people. There were clearly a lot of people that idolized him. They were dressing like him, trying to emulate him. Growing beyond the megachurch that he had taken into the stratosphere, Carl Lentz was now the most recognizable figure associated with the worldwide ministry of Hillsong. When dealing with something like spirituality and religion, you have to be so incredibly careful of your entire message. Your entire brand becoming too entangled with one person that has seemingly transcended the movement. Because, pastor or not, we are all human, and we are all one moment of poor judgment away from ruining our own lives and images, much less an entire religious organization. Carl Lentz was about to be an embodiment of this in all the worst possible ways, for himself, and especially for Hillsong. Prior to becoming the pastor of Hillsong NYC, Carl Lentz had attended Hillsong Bible College in Australia, where he met his wife, Laura. After graduating, Carl returned to his home in Virginia Beach, where he and Laura became the young adult pastors for Wave Church. The senior pastor there, Steve Kelly, worked at Hillsong Church for a decade before moving to Virginia Beach to become the senior pastor at Wave. As such, much of the style and structure of Wave was heavily influenced by Hillsong. Very early into Carl's tenure, things began to change. The culture, the values, the very community began to change. The role he had been selected to fill really just began to shift. His style was vastly different from what the attendees had been used to. And Carl liked to exercise a little bit of control over the congregation. When it came to relationships and dating, he especially had a litany of rules that he expected everyone to adhere to. Things such as date for a whole year before you have your first kiss. Don't say I love you until you propose. While his predecessor had been more compassionate and understanding of relationship dynamics, Carl was not quite as gentle. He allegedly shamed couples, especially young women, who spoke to him in confidence about struggles with purity or told him they had engaged in premarital sex. Early on in his time at Wave, the recurring theme of sexual purity began to emerge in his sermons. This trend, as well as his attitude towards sex and relationships, would follow him into his service at Hillsong NYC. And, over time, it became an even more frequent topic during his services. It ended up being quite telling, really. The entire topic came up so frequently that a lot of people hearing these sermons kind of began to feel that this was something he struggled with, especially when he would openly say that before he met Laura, he was a, quote, player. In May of 2020, Carl began an extramarital affair with a woman named Rhiannon Karam, whom had actually attended Hillsong years prior. Everything ended up moving very fast and was very intense. Rhiannon and Carl were together for 5 months, during which time Carl manipulated and controlled this woman. If it wasn't convenient for him, or not what he wanted, then it just did not happen. It became very clear that he was the star of his own show, and everyone else was just a bit player. Multiple times when Rhiannon set to end the relationship, Carl just would not let her walk away on her terms. On November 4th of 2020, there was an announcement from Brian Houston saying that Carl Lentz was no longer part of Hillsong NYC. Carl reached out to tell the woman that he had been seeing that his wife knew, and the church knew, and that they had found out from his computer at his office. From there, Carl made a big post on Instagram, explaining everything that he and Laura had been both fired, despite Laura's conduct never having been an issue. During the final time that Rhiannon and Carl spoke, Lentz told her that he had paid a lot of money to keep her name buried, so no one would know who she was and for her not to worry. This did not really sit well with Rhiannon, who felt that Carl was trying to control her and dictate her story, while denying her a chance to speak for herself. So Rhiannon contacted a reporter, and the fallout from this entire mess would leave few things untouched. Although Brian Houston and Hillsong were distancing themselves from Carl, and while Carl was the first one to come out and admit his adultery to Brian Houston, he was far more vague with his wording in regards to Carl Lentz being fired. You see, it turns out that Carl Lentz already had a reputation as a womanizer going back to his days at Wave. Numerous people witnessed Carl making inappropriate advances towards women, or had their own experience with him acting inappropriately toward them. Also, in the days following Carl Lentz's dismissal, while Brian Houston had tried to say there had never been any indication of this kind of behavior from Carl before the affair with Rhiannon came to light, there had been in fact multiple reports of sexual impropriety brought against Carl Lentz by 2 former volunteers. The church, however, accused them of fabricating these allegations and dismissed them from their positions at Hillsong. A lot of people believe that, while there was no concrete evidence to support this, Carl Lentz was eliminated because there were rumors that Laura and Carl were about to leave Hillsong, and Lentz had become so much more popular than Brian, or the church itself, that he was going to take a huge number of people with him. And so, as kind of a parting shot, Brian Houston did his best to tarnish Carl's reputation, while trying to not make Hillsong look complicit in his immoral behavior, which it absolutely was. Because the entire time Carl was beneficial to, quote, the Empire, Brian Houston and most of the Hillsong administrators were happy to rake in the cash that Carl had attracted to Hillsong, and look the other way while Carl Lentz chased skirts and fame. But the moment he might be leaving, and taking money out of Hillsong's coffers, then he's fired for questionable leadership qualities and moral decision-making. I'm sorry to say that the entire scandal around Carl Lentz and his ultimate, if satisfying, downfall is not the real end to this story. No, it really was just the first crack in the facade of Hillsong and its image. After it further came out that Carl Lentz had been involved in a second affair, and he admitted to having an Adderall addiction during his time at Hillsong, there were a lot more eyes on Brian Houston and the upper echelons of the Hillsong hierarchy. The very notion that Brian Houston, the big boss of the largest church in the world, had no idea that things like this were going on only made people more curious. Carl Lentz was the superstar of Hillsong, and if he had been engaged in things like extramarital affairs while entertaining an illicit drug habit, how could someone like Brian Houston not know these kind of things were going on? And now, the Berg starts to become more clear. In the days that followed Carl Lentz's expulsion from the church, more and more stuff began to surface. Reports that ranged from mistreatment of volunteers, racism, sexual harassment, bullying were all becoming more common. Then, people began finding evidence that a lot of the church money was being paid out, and the reason for these payments was to silence victims. Silence victims? Silence whose victims? Well, that would be Frank Houston's victims. I'm not going to dive into the atrocities that are said to have been committed by Frank Houston, nor the ones committed by Brian. I'll just begin wrapping this up by saying that because Brian Houston decided to fire Carl Lentz, in what could be considered an act of pettiness, trying to cite the affairs with Rannon as the excuse, he ultimately set the stage for his own downfall. Brian Houston and a lot of people got very rich while looking the other way as people indulged in despicable behaviors. Brian Houston also paid out a lot of money so people would overlook not only his father's horrific crimes, but inappropriate things that Brian Houston got up to as well. These days, Brian Houston is no longer the leader of Hillsong. When the crimes of his father, Frank, began coming to light, Brian Houston was arrested for his role in concealing these crimes. Houston resigned from his position as the global senior minister for Hillsong as a result of his arrest, and has since stepped completely aside and ended all association with Hillsong, although he allegedly has plans to form a new church in a new community, which was supposed to have begun in 2024. At the time of this writing, there is no real word on if this has actually gone anywhere. In the case of institutions like Hillsong and like NPC, I think it's bitterly ironic that the second these places become a success, the instant they become a success, then they have failed. Because as soon as a church, or more specifically, as soon as a man, hits a certain level, and he can play jump rope with the line of morality and then just make his mistakes go away, and, quote, make it right by spending a little money on shushing a victim and their family up, that does seem to be the path even allegedly righteous men walk. Although, I think calling men like Frank and Brian Houston or Carl Lentz truly righteous men is more than a little bit absurd. That all probably goes without saying, though. Hey, Raven. I'm not sure if this is technically more of a dark web story or a road trip story, but I was recently going through one of my old journals and found an entry from 2015 that might be considered a dark web story. If not, it's just another example of how you should be careful. Possibly a slight trigger warning since some of this story does deal with sensitive topics, and of course, as always, thank you for taking the time to read these stories. It was around August of 2015, and I remember I had gone back home to visit my parents and my younger sister, since I'd officially moved out a couple of years prior, and had a habit of going to see them on the weekend at least twice a month. Whenever I wanted to visit, they would either come pick me up from my place, which was about a 30-minute drive, and I would stay the whole weekend and get dropped back off on Sunday night, so I could work the next day. I didn't have a car, but I did have a bike, and would either ride or walk wherever I needed to go. I knew my old neighborhood very well, including all of the roads and paths that led to the main street where the restaurants, dollar stores, and grocery stores were located, and what was once a 2-lane highway just outside of our scarcely populated neighborhood was now a thundering 4-lane highway in a densely populated suburb. There were still no sidewalks, so when you walked or biked anywhere, you would either be in the messy ditches or grass on the side of the road, or you would walk the thin edge of asphalt and have angry drivers swerving and honking at you. Over the years, my friends and I got used to this and learned how to trek safely to and from our destinations. One weekend visit, I ended up wanting some frozen custard from a place up the road after being reminiscent with my parents about our childhood home, growing up and finishing school, and even some of my near-death experiences while growing up here, which I'll probably share with the channel soon since I found my journal. I told my parents that I would make the walk since I was feeling nostalgic and missed the summer errands I would run for snacks and such, and they of course understood and didn't insist on giving me a ride. I took off on my walk, a single sling bag over my shoulder and my usual utilities on me. It takes about 15 minutes to get to the front of my old neighborhood from my old house, and as I walked, I noticed how much the area had changed. Trees we once saw as tiny fruitless saplings were now fully grown and hosting full crops of tangerines. Houses that we watched be built were now settled in and homely, and it felt like decades had passed since I lived there. I got up near the main road and headed down the grassy ditch along the highway, still walking at a decent pace, and eventually reached a traffic intersection with a crosswalk that led to a gas station. And just beyond it was the frozen custard place. As I was crossing through the crosswalk, I saw something bright glimmering on the ground near the center of the crosswalk, and as I jogged across, I slowed down to see what it was. It was actually a GoPro camera. For those who don't know, GoPro cameras are small action cameras that became popular with extreme sports groups, travelers, and thrill seekers who wanted to document their adventures. They're small, most are currently waterproof and shoot in 4K resolution or higher, and can be mounted or even worn on your body anywhere as long as you have the right attachment. They're expensive, and even though this took place in 2015, the model I was looking at would have been basically brand new. The camera was protected inside of a waterproof clear housing, but you could see the bold Hero 4 on the front, and the camera appeared to be undamaged, safely in the hard housing. I, of course, picked it up. Who wouldn't pick up a perfectly good action camera on the side of the road, right? This model also had a screen on the back, so you could actually view the footage on the camera directly instead of having to wait to connect it to a computer like the older models required you to. I pressed the corresponding power button a few times, and the camera wouldn't turn on. So I assumed it was dead, and needed a charge. I continued to fumble with the camera until I made it to my destination, ordered a half-gallon of my craving flavor homemade vanilla and toffee with peanut butter chips, and then jogged back to my house with my treat safely in my bag and the GoPro in my pocket. Once I got to my parents' house, I found a charger cable that matched, removed the camera from its plastic housing, and connected the camera to my laptop to charge. I told my parents what I found and ate my frozen custard as we talked. In an hour or so, the red indicator light on the camera turned off, and the camera had a full charge. There was also an SD card already installed in the camera, and from watching some of the YouTube videos like Daily MD, who used to recover lost GoPro cameras in rivers and lakes, I knew that the first thing to look for was a video of the owner stating the name of the owner, and possibly an address or phone number in case the camera was lost. My mom said that honestly I should just keep the camera, but I wanted to do my due diligence. I opened up the File Explorer and selected the SD card, which apparently had a 64GB capacity, and saw several date-stamped files going back to the previous year, 2014, and ending with one that had the same date as the day that I found the camera. I clicked on the earliest folder in 2014 to look for a video identifying the owner, and I didn't find one. A few of the videos looked pretty simple, and I saw several video thumbnails pop up that looked like they were riding a motorcycle or on the road in the first folder. In the second folder, however, that's where things immediately took a turn. I was about to delete the files and told my dad that I didn't see anything in the first folder. But he said just to be thorough, and to check a couple more folders to be sure, in case the owner filmed what my dad called a slate later on while having the camera. So I did what he said. I went to the next folder and saw several more thumbnails pop up. Only this time, some of them were dark, and a handful of them had images of what looked like a young woman in them. Figuring it might be the owner, I made the mistake of clicking on one, and it was a video of someone following a woman in her neighborhood, and then eventually taking off running after her, grabbing her, and abducting her. She was screaming and fighting back, but most of the camera footage was shaky and incoherent, possibly because the person filming was wearing some kind of harness attachment so they could be hands-free, which was common with GoPro cameras, but I remember seeing the arms and hands of the attacker were covered with black sleeves and gloves. The woman was fighting for a few seconds, and then went limp, and then a gloved hand reached over to the camera and the clip stopped. I should have stopped watching there. I clicked on the next one, and this time it was a different woman, in what looked like a corner store at night. And again, this unknown attacker seemed to be following her around the store. I found myself stuck watching the video as the woman left the store and headed toward her car on the side of the building. Only this time the attacker didn't run up onto her, and the clip ended. There were a few of these clips on the camera mixed in with motorcycle rides and highway footage. But once I reached the folder for 2015, things got really gruesome. The second to last clip I saw, and I'll leave out the unnecessary details, was actually the cruelest one of them all. Another young lady was in what looked like an abandoned building. Her mouth was taped over, and her hands were bound behind her to what I can describe best as a metal column in the middle of the floor. She looked like she'd been in this place for days or even weeks. The attacker seemed to be just standing there watching her cry and try to wiggle free. I'll never forget how horrified this woman looked. It's hard for me to put it into words. The attacker eventually got close to her, grabbing her face to hold on to the camera, and I couldn't make out what he said, but it sounded like, "Smile for the camera, please. They like nice girls." in a smug, muffled voice. The woman, of course, became hysterical and started thrashing around and crying, and the camera jostled around and then stopped filming. The last clip was a motorcycle ride which ended with the cyclist running a red light and turning through the intersection, and somehow the camera fell loose from the rider. This was the same intersection I ended up crossing where I found the camera. Of course, I told my parents. We all had a moment of feeling sick, frightened, and disgusted by what was on the camera, and my dad called the police. We had to speak with investigators, give statements. I even was asked to go with one of the investigators to show them where I found the camera, which I didn't know why they needed me to do since it was so clear from the last video where the camera was lost, but yeah. One of the officers mentioned things like this can range from simple extortion from gangs to sex trafficking and torture rackets for the dark web, which honestly gave us all chills. They thanked us for our time, took the camera and the SD card, and even though I had touched it, they said they could still use the camera for the investigation. As usual with these stories, you don't get much out of the police once they leave with statements. And I know that there were a handful of stories my dad looked up about missing people, but in the months to come, we only heard one story about a woman who was found after she didn't come home from the grocery store a few months back. She apparently ended up somewhere in Arizona, and authorities were apparently able to figure out where she was being kept. We have no idea if us turning over the camera had anything to do with that case or not, and since most of the footage on it remained unseen by us, there was no way for us to know how many potential victims were filmed being abducted. So, that's the story. And again, not sure if it's actually a dark web story or otherwise, because there wasn't a lot of evidence to suggest it, but yeah. I hope that they were able to capture the sick individual who was disturbed enough to do all this, and dumb enough not to wipe his camera. When I was about 8 or 9, my brother, a friend, and I went fishing at the dam. We were having fun, casting our lines and laughing, when I suddenly lost my footing. The downgrade of the dam was slick with slime, and before I knew it, I was sliding down straight into the water. At first I tried to resurface, but something wrapped around my foot, holding me under. A fishing line, maybe? A panic should have taken over, but instead a strange sense of calm washed over me. Then, clear as day, I heard a voice. Not from anyone around me, but from somewhere deeper. Maybe inside myself, telling me to raise my hands. I did exactly this. Down the way, 2 adults must have seen what was happening. They ran over, reaching into the water and searching. Somehow, against all odds, they found my hands. They pulled with everything they had, and finally I broke free, gasping for air as they dragged me onto solid ground. I don't know how long I was under, but I never lost my breath. Never screamed, never let fear take over. When it was all over, I couldn't thank those 2 men enough. They were my heroes. Even now, I think back to that moment, the voice, the calm, the impossible timing of it all, and I wonder, how much do we really understand about this reality? Hey Raven, I hope life is treating you well. My girlfriend encouraged me to send this story in, and after a bit of back and forth with myself, I decided to go for it. This experience has stayed with me for over a decade, and I still think about it often, especially when I catch the scent of a very particular perfume. I had just turned 14. My birthday falls near the end of February, which will become important later. A few days after my birthday, I began to notice something strange. Out of nowhere, I started smelling my great-grandmother's perfume. It wasn't subtle or vague. It was a very distinct scent. She had unique tastes in fragrances, and to this day, I've never met anyone else who wore the same one. It was the kind of perfume that instantly brought her face to mind. At first, it would just be the faintest trace in the air, almost like someone had passed through the room moments before I entered. But as the days went on, it became stronger. At times, I genuinely felt like I was the one wearing it, even though I obviously wasn't. I asked my mom and grandma if maybe they found an old bottle and sprayed it, or perhaps if some of my great-grandmother's old jumpers had been brought out. We used to do that, hold on to her jumpers and spray them with her perfume as a way of comforting ourselves while we grieved. But they were both confused and adamant. No one had touched anything. Her clothes were all packed away in storage, and neither of them had been using the perfume. I was the only one who could smell it. As each day passed, the scent didn't fade. It followed me, lingering in my bedroom, drifting behind me as I walked, even clinging to my school blazer. I started to wonder if maybe I was just imagining it. No one else could smell anything. And the more I questioned it, the more I started feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe I was just stressed out. School had been intense, and I thought my mind was just playing tricks on me. But then the stomach pain started. At first it was a dull ache. I brushed it off as period cramps or maybe a bug going around the school. But it didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Sharper, deeper, and harder to ignore. After a few sleepless nights, I woke up in the middle of the night in agony. It felt like something had exploded inside of me. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. I screamed for my mom and stepdad, terrified, crying and clutching my stomach like it was on fire. My mom, half asleep and still skeptical, thought it might be a particularly bad case of cramps. But I knew that something was wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong. She called 111, the NHS non-emergency number, and after speaking to a nurse, she was told to get me to the hospital immediately. I was in so much pain that my stepdad had to carry me to the car. I couldn't stand, couldn't walk. I was vomiting, shaking, and sobbing. I'm pretty sure half of the street heard me screaming. My stepdad dragged the dog off at my grandparents' house and stayed behind to explain what was happening. So it was just me and my mom in the car. She was in the driver's seat and I was sprawled out across the back seats, curled up and clutching my stomach. That is when things got unsettling. As we drove through the quiet night, that familiar perfume returned, stronger than ever. It filled the car like someone had sprayed it right there in the back seat. I closed my eyes trying to focus on staying conscious through the pain, but the scent was overwhelming. And then I felt something. A hand, cold but gentle, wrapped around mine. It wasn't my mom. I opened my eyes and looked toward the front seat, only to see that she had both hands firmly on the wheel, focused on getting us to the hospital. She wasn't touching me. But I swear to you that someone was holding my hand. It wasn't frightening. Not in the way you would expect. It was comforting, like someone was saying, "I'm here, you're not alone." When we got to the hospital, they rushed me in and began running tests. As it turns out, my appendix hadn't just ruptured, it had burst. Like, completely exploded. The doctor said the amount of poison in my system from the burst was life-threatening. If I hadn't had surgery within the next few hours, I would have died. Not could have, not might have. I would have died. That was hard to hear. I was only 14. I hadn't even had my first kiss yet, hadn't finished high school, hadn't lived. And yet I was hours away from dying. Now, here's where it all comes together. Remember how I said my birthday is in late February, and how I could smell my great-grandmother's perfume in the car? She passed away 2 months before my mom bought that car. She never sat in it, never touched it. There was absolutely no way her perfume could have lingered in that space. I could maybe explain the scent in the house. Maybe it clung to her things, or maybe it was in the air somehow, but not the car. That made no sense. Some people I've told this story to think that I was hallucinating, that the pain or stress caused me to imagine it, or that I was on strong meds. But I wasn't given any medication until I arrived at the hospital and was admitted to a ward. The scent and the sensation of someone holding my hand, that all happened before any drugs. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe my brain, in crisis mode, made something up to comfort me, but deep down, I don't think it did. I think my great-grandmother was there with me that night, watching over me, comforting me, guiding me through something that could have ended my life. I'm 25 now, and every so often, I still catch a trace of that perfume. Never as strong as before, but just enough. Enough to let me know that she's still here and still checking in. And honestly, I find that incredibly comforting. I love walking at dusk. Sometimes I listen to music, and sometimes in silence. I would usually walk up a steep hill, a name that I will not say, and I left a little late one time, so it was dark as I was leaving. This hill was right next to my house, so it wasn't that far. Anyway, I was walking down with my dog, Sparky, and all of a sudden he started barking at the bushes. Then, a man, probably in his late 60s, jumped out of said bushes. He asked if I was alone. I said no, under my breath, and then started speed walking. After 2 minutes of running, Sparky stopped and lifted his ears up, and then the man jumped on me and was trying to grasp something in his pocket. It was a knife. My dog bit him on the arm, and he jumped and started screaming. I was able to run away, and I ran into my house, locked the doors, and dialed 911. I told them what happened, and they said that they would drive around the area. They did end up finding him, and he did get locked up. I've never been so thankful for my dog. In the summer of 2022, the Clay County Sheriff's Department responded to a call in Talladega National Forest. When they arrived at the scene, they found 22-year-old Adam Simji lying on the ground, as his panicked girlfriend, 20-year-old Michaela Pallas, performed CPR on the college student. What was meant to have been a romantic time of bonding for the young couple had just been turned into a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Adam and Michaela were students at Central Florida University and were taking a road trip to spend a good amount of time together before classes started up again. They knew once school was back in session for what would have been Adam's final year of college, that there would be less time for them to get nice romantic evenings together. And it was as they were traveling through the Talladega National Forest that a fateful encounter would shatter multiple lives and end with a young man needlessly losing his own. The young couple were driving down an old forestry road when they were flagged down by 21-year-old Yasmin Hyder. When they spotted the young woman on the side of the road, she clearly looked distressed. Once she had Adam and Michaela's attention, Hyder proceeded to ask them for help getting her vehicle started. Hyder then began to lure the couple further into the woods, where her dark motives would become clear when she pulled a gun and forced them deeper still into the forest, where she attempted to rob the couple, telling them both to empty their pockets before marching them further into the woods. From this moment on, Adam did everything he could to get Michaela out of those woods alive. As it turns out, Hyder wasn't the only one armed that day. While Adam drew his own concealed handgun, he tried telling Hyder that everything of value they had was in the car, and that she was welcome to it, that no one had to get hurt. Hyder was alarmed when Adam had pulled his own firearm and said, "Are you serious?" Before there was an exchange of gunfire, an explosive frenzy of violence. After things were silent again, both Adam and Hyder were on the ground, wounded, and Hyder reportedly said it wasn't supposed to be like this. During the firefight, Hyder had been struck several times in the torso. Adam had been shot in the back. Michaela called him a hero and said that he was shot while trying to protect her. In the aftermath, a second woman that Michaela had spotted watching them approached the wounded Hyder after Hyder had called for help. The second woman then fled into the woods, leaving Hyder behind. Once the second woman was gone, Michaela called 911 and got in touch with emergency personnel, after which she began performing CPR on Adam until deputies and other first responders arrived. Sadly, Adam Simji was unable to be revived, and he passed away from his injuries in those woods. Hyder, on the other hand, survived her injuries, and after being found nearby was airlifted to a local hospital. She underwent numerous surgeries and recovered in the hospital under the watchful eyes of deputies. But the search for the second person would set in motion an unsettling string of discoveries that no one could see coming. The search that resulted from Michaela saying that she saw a second person watching from the nearby trees was going to yield more than anyone could have possibly foreseen. And this entire case would take an even darker turn, as if it weren't dark enough already. While searching for the alleged accomplice, the deputies would find some very alarming things indeed. Namely in the form of a large encampment set up deep within the forest as a kind of base camp. In the hours since the shooting, police had received reports that there may be a large camp of people living off the grid, and this site was less than half a mile from where the attempted robbery had taken place. There were indeed a large number of tents erected in the area, and upon spotting a woman near one of them, the police called out to her. As they ordered her to the ground, an armed 5-year-old boy with a loaded shotgun ran out of the woods. Despite being ordered to drop the weapon, the child proceeded to the woman's side before laying the weapon down. The woman was identified as Crystal Pinkins, and the armed 5-year-old boy was her son. The Department of Human Resources was alerted, and they took custody of the boy, while his mother was hit with a litany of charges, including endangering the welfare of a child. The other charges included 1 count of murder, 2 counts of robbery, and 2 counts of kidnapping. Yasmin Hyder was also charged with 1 count of murder and 2 kidnappings and the robbery charges as well. Michaela Paulus, for her part, was not physically harmed during the events that took place that day in the Talladega National Forest. However, she was deeply, emotionally traumatized by them. Understandably, the loss of Adam weighed heavily upon her, especially when she saw it as him sacrificing himself to keep her safe. Yasmin Hyder readily admitted to faking distress to get the couple to stop for her. She admitted that her goal was to lure them deeper into the forest and then rob them. And while her intent may never have been to harm either Adam nor Michaela, her actions that day cost a young couple their future, and a much beloved young man his life. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 35 years in prison for robbery, the second-degree murder of Adam Simji, and the kidnapping of Michaela Paulus. Pinkins was found guilty on all charges but the kidnapping, and Hyder even testified against Pinkins at her trial. In Pinkins's case, she was sentenced to the maximum of life in prison for robbery, murder, and the unlawful use of a firearm during a crime of violence. The entire thing had allegedly been Pinkins' idea, and she had even provided Hyder with the firearm that killed Adam Simji. It's a bit difficult to come up with some closing thoughts for this case. It's one of those things where, if you're not careful in how you couch it, either you sound like a naive idealist saying help everyone regardless of your own safety, or it goes the other way and you become a weird kind of nihilistic rally. I think the best middle ground I can find is to say that, unfortunately, in such a big world with so many people, that regardless of our best efforts to prevent them, tragedies will always find a way to happen. All we can do is stay vigilant. If your gut says that maybe something is off about the person asking for help, then you should listen to it. Follow your instincts. After countless of generations on this earth, I think most of us have really good ones. And it's important to pay attention to them. The case of Adam Simji does serve as a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the potential for violence to erupt in unexpected places, shattering dreams in an instant. While the perpetrators have been held accountable by the justice system, the enduring legacy is one of profound loss, but also of the bravery of a young man remembered as a hero, and the resilience of a survivor left to carry the weight of memory. Hey Raven, I just want to start by saying how much I appreciate your podcast. I often listen to you and other narrators when I'm working out at the gym or going for walks with my mom. Your content has been a source of comfort and inspiration for me, and lately, it's even made me consider starting my own podcast to share experiences like mine. I'm a 31-year-old female, and for as long as I can remember, I've had vivid dreams that felt like messages from God. I wouldn't say that I was always the most spiritual person, but I've always believed in a higher power. My family is Hindu, but because I attended Catholic school for kindergarten and first grade, and went to church growing up, I've always had a stronger connection to Christianity. The experience that I want to share happened when I was 26, just before COVID. At the time, I was struggling with serious health issues, specifically constant vomiting, and I was also in a very bad place mentally due to events that I won't get into. One night, I had a dream where angels appeared to me. They told me to rekindle my friendship with my cousin, whom I was angry with at the time. I didn't take the dream too seriously at first, but then something happened that changed my life forever. A few nights later, I had what I can only describe as a near-death experience. I remember feeling my soul literally leave my body. I could see myself from above, and then I began floating upward. First, I saw the street outside, and then the vastness of the universe, and before I knew it, I was in heaven, sitting on a cloud, and that's when I saw Jesus. He spoke to me. He told me that everything that happened to me and my family was not meant to be, that it was the wrong outcome. He said that I needed to make peace with my cousin because God was not pleased with what had happened to her. He also told me that God wanted to perform a miracle for us, and that, in time, I would begin to understand everything. When that time came, he said I needed to start praying. The next thing I knew, my soul was being pulled back into my body. I woke up suddenly gasping for air. It was the most intense experience of my life, but here's the truly incredible part. After that encounter with him, my health started improving. The vomiting that had plagued me for so long finally stopped. However, I continued to experience out-of-body episodes until 2021. Then in 2022, I had another dream. In it, my cousin's father appeared and admitted that he had caused everything. At the time, I wasn't sure what to make of it, but then last year, my grandmother revealed the truth to me. My cousin's father had in fact been behind everything that led to my mental distress all those years ago. He wasn't just responsible for my suffering, he was the root of the conflict within my family as well. His actions not only damaged my family's relationships, but he also completely ruined my cousin's life, his own daughter. What's worse, my grandmother also told me that my cousin's stepmother had used witchcraft against my cousin. That explained why my cousin had been acting out of character for so long. It was all part of a bigger picture that I had been blind to until now. Hearing this truth was a turning point for me. It confirmed everything I had experienced, and I knew then that I needed to go on a spiritual journey. I started going back to church and devoting myself to God in a way I never had before. For the longest time, I thought I was crazy, but after listening to the stories on your podcast, I realize I'm not alone. There are others out there who have had similar encounters, and that gives me hope. I truly believe that God is going to perform the miracle he promised, that he will turn things around for me and my family and bring justice for us. Thank you for taking the time to read my story, Raven. Your podcast has given me the courage to share this, and for that, I am truly grateful.